I say, it sounds funny to you guys probably for me to say have fun. This is fun for me to be able to get out, and I get out a lot. As the COO of our organization, a lot of my job is getting out and talking to people and interacting. So any way I can help in terms of understanding what's been going on here and how you guys might tackle this going forward, I'm happy to do that. So MRED, as you mentioned, was created in 2008. It's the merger of two different MLSs back in the Chicagoland area. One was this huge MLS called MLS&I. The other one was a slightly smaller one called MAP, but it was a privately owned MLS, owned by brokerages. And so when MRED was created, after a lot of arguments and a lot of litigation and fun stuff like that, what came out is this organization that's actually a broker-owned and controlled organization with an aspect of association ownership to it. I'm not going to get into all the detail about that. That's not so interesting. But what is interesting about that is that everything we do is, dictated by, generated by, controlled by our brokerages. And they're all represented on our board. We have because we're an LLC, it's technically called a board of managers. So it's board of directors, 15 people, 13 of those people are brokerages. And so these brokerages, they're the ones that, when we'll talk about the PLN, we'll talk about our private listing network and this stuff in a little bit, but they're the ones who got behind this and generated this and asked us to do this. And this isn't MLS staff stuff, and I know you guys do it the same way here. That's really important as a part of a culture to understand that your MLS, your association here, isn't interested in doing anything that you guys really don't want them to do, right? They want to do what you want us to do. It's just a question of figuring that out. The key is the process. Figure out how to do this, come back, make sure that there's a lot of communication and understanding. So anyway, that pretty much kick it off for you. And
just so you are aware, just in case you're not, MIBOR is an association MIBOR is the association that owns the MIBOR BLC. The BLC listing service is primarily utilized by MIBOR association members, but we do offer our services, our BLC listing service, outside of our association. So there are, for example, the Crossroads Association down in Columbus and Jackson County utilize our MIBOR BLC listing service while still maintaining their association, but Crossroads doesn't have ownership. So there's a little bit of ambiguity. Something else that's interesting right now, as far as from a structure and organization process, is there is a movement in the industry, in the MLS world, for consolidation, cooperation, shared services. So there's all of these different entities looking for a way to make their services attractive, effective, cost-effective in that mix as well. So for example, if I'll just use you guys. If MRED and MIBOR are all subscribing to the same platforms, then in that instance, and we're not, but if we were, then it would make sense maybe to do some kind of partnership. So that's what MLSs across the country are trying to figure out, is where are we similar? Even if we're not neighbors, physical neighbors with another MLS, if we are operating under a similar business model, are offering similar services, is there some way that we can share those resources and those costs incurred with that? So there's this trend in the industry that's happening underneath all of these other stories that are coming out too. So it's a very interesting time.
No, it's a great
Fun
point.
times to be alive.
Yeah, and it's a great point. And just to emphasize, there is a similarity in that whereas MIBOR, right, you have the association and it has the MLS, and you're having the MLS, you're doing partnerships with other associations in the area, or at least one other association in the area, to provide that MLS. MRED has 15 associations. It just so happens that not one of them owns MRED. But if you were to imagine one of them owning MRED and giving out the services or contracting to do the services with the other 14, it's the same thing. So all 15 of those associations in Northern Illinois are using MRED the same way that your association and the associations that you're working with are using BLC. So does that make sense? So it's pretty much, when I say across the country, there are so many different business models, but at base, there are ways for all of these organizations to work together. A lot of the smaller associations and smaller MLSs around the country are feeling a lot of pressure from the National Association of Realtors, from their state associations to consolidate, get together, do stuff like that. Why? It's not because they don't like them, it's because they just think it's better business to be able to provide all the products and services to all of their members that the larger organizations are able to do. Does that make sense? Right? So anyway.
All right. So we talk about all the time the purpose of the BLC is for realtors, for our member realtor subscribers, to offer cooperation and compensation. So the BLC is really the platform that allows you to put your listings in, offer cooperation and compensation to your competitors so that you can come to a mutual agreement. You guys all know this, you live in it every day. So there has been a trend, I suppose, a practice that has become a bit more prevalent. Thank you for the word. I'm like, Jeff, help me. A bit more prevalent in that there are certain times and certain agents that prefer to withhold a listing from being available to all of their competitors. MRED identified this prevalence, this trend, a few years ago, and they came up with a solution. So this is one of many solutions, but it's interesting, and they were so quick on the forefront of this that I think it bears explanation.
And I'll talk about it a little bit. And the reason we were on the forefront of this is because we're so brilliant. No, that's not the reason. The reason we were at the forefront of this is because in our marketplace, and we have about now 46,000 agents that access MRED, but we have certain areas in our marketplace that are, when I say very competitive, in many cases really high-priced homes, things of that nature, and agents look for ways to differentiate themselves. And so we saw, we observed in the marketplace, this was back in 2015, and by the way, whatever you want to call it, keeping these listings off the MLS, this isn't anything that's brand new, right? People have been doing it forever, but the idea behind being in the MLS, right? The MLS is what? It's a cooperative. And so everybody's here, and it doesn't feel like you're maybe here voluntarily, right? It doesn't feel like it. You kind of feel like you have to do it, but that's a business reason. There are people that don't join realtor associations out there, not many, but they don't, and they do residential business, and they're not in the MLS typically, because there isn't an MLS for them to be in, right? So you guys join these cooperatives, these MLSs, for a reason, and that is you all agree, hey, look, we're going to legally be able to expose our properties to each other and do business with each other. That's cool. We can do that. And guess what? Government, law enforcement, whatever you want to call it, they've all said that's fine. Even though you're competitors, this isn't an antitrust issue. You guys can go ahead and put this stuff in there. And by the way, the reason is it benefits the consumer, right? Miracle marketplace that has created over 100 years of MLS, right? So that's what's so great about it. Back in 2015, we were looking at, when I say an incidence of, it seemed like people were starting to go to other possible ways of marketing properties outside the MLS. And what they were doing, sometimes accidentally, was violating our rules by doing it, okay? Because they weren't putting it in the MLS when they were supposed to. And that's how we developed, eventually, this approach. Want me to go into the approach? And our approach that we developed was, look, there are these other private networks out there. And what we're going to do is simply create a private network of our own. And we're going to have it in the MLS. It's a separate part of the MLS system. But people can go in there, and it's open to everybody that's in MRED. So all of our customers have access to it. Some of these private networks will say you have to apply to become a member of them. And they try to make it, and I understand what they're trying to do. They're trying to make it a special place to go. And you'll have agents that will say, hey, look, not only am I putting your listing in the MLS, but I'm putting it in this other special place. that I had to qualify for. And that makes this special, and that differentiates me from somebody else, right? So we're like, you know what? The problem with that is we need to have them go to a place that, while they want to keep it private, pre-market it, okay? Or maybe they want to keep it off of, you know, being sent out to all of the websites out there because it's we hear the celebrity thing a lot. You know, where, I can't tell you how many times in San Francisco, you heard about Tom Cruise having a house to sell, right? Like, how many houses does Tom Cruise have to sell, right? But that was always the example, is that if Tom Cruise wants to sell his house, he doesn't want to have it put in the MLS.
I told him our local example was Jim Irsay. Jim
All right,
Irsay
Jim
puts his
Irsay.
house on the market. Nope. He doesn't want anybody to know that he's leaving town.
Right. When you put Jim Irsay's property, you're not putting Jim Irsay as the owner of record in there. Even if you go to public records, it's not going to say Jim Irsay is the owner of the house, right? But people may just recognize the house because it's a celebrity house. So we get that. We understand that. So what we tried to do was create something that could accommodate all of this. So and I'll take it from our standard listing network, which is what everybody's required to put all of our listings in within 48 hours of when they take the listing, okay? 48 hours, it's got to go in the standard listing network. However, you can choose, if you'd like to put it in our private listing network, okay? And the private listing network is a limited set of fields. It has certain things that are required, just like you would with anything. And by the way, you have to have a listing agreement. Right? That's state law. You got to have it just like you do here. You got to have a listing agreement, but you can put it in the private listing network and pre-market it. In the private listing network, we actually give you the ability to have a range of price rather than just a single price. And what we discovered in our research, right?
Here.
Well, we've had it for 3 years. 87%. We've tracked some of this stuff. 87% of the listings that went into the private listing network changed their price from either the range or the definite price that they had in the private listing network when they put in the standard network. So that tells us that people are using this to figure out how to price property. Now, in that private listing network, it only goes, like I say, to our other agents, the customers of MRED. Okay, we won't syndicate it for you, so we don't send it out anywhere for you. If you want to put it out somewhere, you can, but we won't syndicate it for you. Kind of the highlights, because the idea of the private listing network is to have a B2B little place, business-to-business place for agents to show each other their properties. Does that make sense? And get that started and to pre-market the property. But aside from those two things, okay, and what's really caused the issue, or what the controversy or conversation was at NAR, was that we have a rule, and we have a rule, and we've had a rule in place for a couple of years, that if you publicly advertise a property, okay, you must put it in the private listing network or the standard listing network within 24 hours. Now, what am I talking about there? What we're talking about is this other group of properties that we call office exclusives. Is that the term you use out here typically? Or, you know? Yeah, I mean, there are people, like celebrities, whatever it is, if you want to keep the property out of the MLS entirely, we don't tell you can't do that. But you have to have them sign a waiver saying, okay, they're waiving. And in the waiver, we make sure that there's stuff in there not for the benefit of the MLS, for the benefit of our customer, for our agents, that says to them, you understand, we're not putting it in the MLS. That means you're not getting exposed to the 45,000 agents. That means you're not going to be sent out by the MLS to all of the other, broker sites through IDX, stuff like that. But these office exclusives that are out there, we're not telling anybody you can't do them. If that's your business model, if that's the way you want to do it, that's fine. Keep it off the MLS. But if you're keeping it off the MLS because you want to keep it private, then you can't tell us, oh, by the way, we're going to advertise it as well. Can't do both. So if you want to keep it off the MLS, keep it within your office, talk to your current clients about a property that you've listed, great. But if you've decided you're going to advertise it, meaning the aggregator websites, where a sign in the yard, anything like that, you got 24 hours. And again, we've given you the option. You can put it in the private listing network if you'd like, and pre-market it that way if you'd like, or put it in the standard network. Am I making any sense here? I talk about this all the time. So sometimes I talk about it thinking, oh, everybody, when if you're not familiar with it, sometimes it's, so if you need
The benefit of the private network is what?
well, there've been two instances there where I think that are the most prevalent, and that is number one, again, if they don't want to put it out to the general public yet, so they're going to put it in there, right? And so they kind of keep it and see. The biggest benefit I see is the pre-marketing, is to be able to find out, okay, how's this going to play with everybody? How's this going to land with everybody? I think that's probably, what were the other, I always have to remind myself, because we always talk about, 5 reasons. That's pretty much it. Some of the stuff they talk about, like, and in some other MLSs, they talk about properties needing repairs and stuff. We have a temp off the market. We have other statuses that could handle that. But there are people that want to get the property out there and get a feel of what everybody's doing. But that, and again, when I say the privacy issue, you can handle the privacy issue and put it in the private listing network because you have the right to say showings or no showings. Now, it's got to be everybody's treated the same. So either you're showing the property to anybody, any agent that calls up, or you're not showing it. But we don't create any reports that you can hand out of the private listing network, only an agent report. So you see where I'm going. So we're kind of trying to enable these people to keep things private within the community of the MLS, so to speak, without blasting it out to the world. Yes, sir.
Hold on. Now, if you're going to ask questions, you have to have the dodgeball line.
Now,
So we are recording this. I've never in my life of planning these sessions had so many people follow up with me and say, hey, I can't make it, will you record it? So we are, in order to make sure that any questions that those in the ether are going to have, are addressed here, they probably have the same questions you guys are going to ask. So if you have a question, just grab that mic, talk into it. We can hear you fine in the room, but that just allows us to broadcast it. And then just look around for another hand.
And stay out here in case it's a MIBOR rather than an MRED question. Right? Yes, sir.
My question is, if I'm the listing agent and I declare that there are going to be no showings by other agents, does that prevent me from showing it too?
No, it doesn't. And again, it's your own clients, right? Your own people, so you can do whatever you want with your own listing. The issue is you've got to treat everybody else the same.
No sign in the yard.
No sign in the yard. No, sign in the yard, once you get into the private listing network, you can put a sign in the yard. And that's, once you advertise it, you can go into the private listing network or the standard network. The reason that's important also, by the way, thank you for reminding me, is that we have the age-old problem, right? You're driving around with somebody and they're like, what about that house? And it's got a sign on it. And you're like, I don't know anything about it. And they look at you like, what? What's it? So that was another thing that the private listing network helped us to address. But what we're not interfering with is what you want to do with your own client.
So let's hold off for just a second on other questions because I do want to go through what our current process is with MIBOR, and that may help highlight those differences and where we go from here. So give me just 1 second here and we'll go through this. So currently, our process, our procedure is as soon as you have that listing contract, then our rules kick in. If you have a valid, fully executed listing agreement, then within 2 business days, it must be either entered in the BLC, which is what most of our listings, go through that process. Or within that same 2 business days, you need to file an exemption. So we call, in our marketplace, we call these exempt listings. Have you guys heard that term? So we call them exempt listings. There's an exempt listing form, there's a process, but it does create a few challenges. So let me just walk you through what happens, because what we have you do is we have you, complete your contract. You file it within 2 business days. So by filing that exemption, all that simply means is you're emailing it to our help desk. And you go, okay, it's filed. And you have no idea what we do with it. All right? So what we do with it is we actually take that listing. I think I have a slide here to show you. Yeah, so we actually take that listing and we have a staff-only section of the BLC that we have access We create your listing from the tax record. So if you're familiar with the process of putting a listing in, we simply begin a new listing, filling from the tax record, and change the agent information to that's on the contract, that's on the form. Okay, so we just create an incomplete listing on your behalf. And then we go into our little private section over here that's called the Exempt tab, Exempt listing tab that we have. And there's a simple exempt listing. We mark it yes. What are the dates on the contract, beginning and end? Save it as incomplete. And then the listing agent, the managing broker, and MIBOR staff are the only ones who can see that listing. It's in there as incomplete, just like all of your other incomplete listings that you begin are not finished with, so you save as incomplete, and then you can go back into it later. Okay? So once that has been created, you as the listing agent have access to work on that listing if you have an intention of putting it on later. Okay? We, the exempt listing form, if you guys are familiar with it, it's the same kind of thing. It says, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, by signing this form, you understand that your listing will not be marketed to the 8,600 realtors that utilize the MIBOR BLC listing service. Are you okay with that? And they sign it. Okay? So it can be edited, but that listing, that incomplete exempt listing cannot be published until or unless you send the bottom portion of that form that was rolled out earlier this year that says, now we understand that this listing is going to be entered and marketed, at that time, then we remove that exemption flag and your listing can go live, provided you've completed all of the required fields and completed your listing. Now, the issue, the sticking point for many people using this is that days on market per BLC rules begins at the listing contract date. All right, so regardless of if you have a new listing and you put it in within the 2 business days, whatever that listing contract date is that you put in that listing, that starts the clock. It's simply the calendar. If you're, I don't even know what word to use anymore, people. If you're delaying it, withholding it, exempting that listing for any period of time, at such time you and your sellers decide, okay, we're ready, go ahead and put it on the market, then that listing is, starts with the original date. That days on market starts with the original date.
Let me just jump in for a second
sure.
and say, in the private listing network, no days on market. Right. Doesn't start running until it gets into the standard listing network. Why? Because you're pre-marketing the property. You're testing it out. Not really marketing it yet. Make sense?
The typical practice has been, even though a listing exemption has been filed, that listing may be, and is probably being marketed in some form of fashion as a coming soon, which is really fuzzy terminology as well, as a pocket listing, whatever it might be. The likelihood is that it is being talked about, marketed in some form or fashion, and if it is available to the public, then it is in our estimation on market. And we also are just trying to make sure that we are following along with the contract rules, okay, contract laws. So that's our process right now. Something that I think a lot of people forget about is that we've also got a field within the BLC under that internet section on the contract page called intranet. So this public internet idea. But within that public internet section, there's your choices for, is it available to show? Is this listing available for buyer's agents to schedule a showing and get their people in there? We allow you 7 days. So our rules say, if you're going to put a listing into the service, then it must be available within the first 7 days that it has been listed. If it's not going to be available within that first 7 days, you could exempt it, you could submit it and then temp off market if you need to. But our rules say it's got to be available within that first 7 days. So that's more your I have a contract, but we're not quite ready. They're doing repairs. I'm getting the professional photographers in there. We're putting together a staging plan. Whatever that marketing piece may be, that gives you a little cushion in there. Anything that is marked that it's not available to show, but it will be within the next 7 days, the syndication is restricted. So it does not go out to IDXT, it does not go out to the homes.com, Zillow.com, MIBOR.com, Trulia, Realtor. It doesn't go out to any of those feeds. It's restricted. but other agents can see it. So I know, okay, 123 Main Street, it is there. It is a listing. We just can't get in there right now. And the expectation is, as soon as it's ready, it'll flip. It may be 7 days, it may be 3 days. It just kind of depends. But at any point that it is ready, then you can just come in your listing, change it to yes, it's available to show today, and it's live. But that gives you that cushion for preparation. Does that make sense? That's our current process. I keep moving my eye.
Angie?
Yes.
I don't know if I need a microphone. The process you just described does not need an exempt listing form.
Correct. It is a real listing. It's just, you just can't walk in there today, but soon you can walk in there. Okay? But again, all of our rules currently are based off of your contract, right, in line with Indiana license law. Cool? Okay. So, I should have a prize for whoever can name this quote. I could explain it better, but I would need charts and graphs and an easel. Anybody? It's one of my favorite geek quotes the whole time. So we have been tracking those exemptions in a meaningful way since about 2014. 2014 was kind of our throwaway count because I believe that's when this rule really kicked in. So over the last several years, we've tracked what exemptions have come in. So this is exempt 2015, 2016, 17, 18, and then thus far in 2019, which of course has not been completed. I pulled this Monday. Okay. So far we're kind of on trend with what happened last year. So it's definitely been an upward trend. Okay. This is month by month for 2019. So the biggest spike in those received was in March and April. And I wonder if that's just seasonality, perhaps, that everybody knows you got to get your house on the market in the spring. So we're going to sign as many listings as we can in the spring, but nobody's really ready because they have all of these cleanups and spruce ups to do. I don't know. I'm just guessing. You guys are the ones doing this.
Motivation for all of this is so a listing agent can do a B&B?
That's one of the concerns that you all have. But we actually do take a look at that, and that's not the majority of them. Occasionally there's one of those, but that really is not the majority of them. That's your fear, not you personally, but collectively, that has been the pushback that we get is, well, that agent's just trying to get a double-ended sale, double-ended transaction.
But are you looking as well at the stats of those may not be true me and me's, but maybe the deaths?
In office, we do. Yeah, we take a look at that too.
So
and
what's
again, not the
combined
majority.
percentage? But what's the combined?
I did not pull those numbers, but I will get them to you. I can follow up with an email and give you those stats. It's not secret. So, yeah, I can pull those.
And I was going to say that.
Yeah, and you've got some very good
again,
statistics.
it's a great point that you're making, that, again, it isn't any of our business if you guys decide that the best way for you to sell a property is to keep it in-house, right? If that legitimately is in your client's, your seller's best interest to do that. It's just, the issue becomes, you've joined a cooperative where you have thousands of agents that are available to look at a property and sell it. And so it becomes somewhat questionable at some point in time if you're not putting it in the cooperative, but you're trying to do all these other things to sell the property. All it looks like to us is that, you know what, we're just trying to skirt what we have openly agreed to join. And when I say that, there's two sides to that, right? It's one thing for you to withhold stuff, but then you want to swim in the pool, right, and stuff like that. It's like somebody who just goes to a buffet bringing a fork, right? Right? You got to bring a dish too. So that means you got to bring your listings if you want to be part of the cooperative and benefit from everybody else who's in the cooperative. That's what the logic was behind all of this. And I know we're going to talk about the changes that NAR has made and how that's going to impact you guys at some point in time. But I just wanted to jump in on that. I appreciate what you're saying, though. I really do.
Yeah. So as we talk about, why would agents withhold the listings? Why would they file these as exemptions? There are some legitimate reasons behind that. So, privacy concerns like the celebrity effect. Or sometimes we've heard the stories of, there's an ugly divorce going on, there's a restraining order in place, things like that that tie into these privacy concerns. Phased marketing, we talk about, we're staging, we're getting photographers in there. Maybe I can't book them within the time frame that I would like to, and so we're gonna have to kind of phase this out, delay things for a little bit. Repairs or the request for no showings for a certain period of time. And then anybody deal with corporate owners, REOs, bank owns, yeah, sometimes there's time that is needed to get all of those pieces in place. That was a market I lived in for a number of years. I'm glad to be up here now. So there are legitimate reasons, and then there are the fishy reasons too. But we do find that those aren't as prevalent as what the perception, I believe, is. So
We have, when I say we, off the record, officially we have no opinion about the effect that this is having on the private networks that exist outside of the MLS. Unofficially, I have opinions because I've been doing this for 20-something years and I know agents that are in there. And they're telling me that so many of the listings that are in these private networks are 2, 3, 4 years old, that they're just sitting in there and that they're making quotes of, oh, we've got 800 listings in there, when there may be really only 100 legitimate listings. And again, if you want to go ahead and do that, put your listing in some kind of private network that's not a part of the MLS, more power to you if that's how you feel you need to differentiate yourself. We're just trying to make sure that, and when I say that, all we hear from people now is, oh, they're putting it in both. So they're putting it in our private network, they're putting it in those outside private networks occasionally now. They're not cheap. So,
Mitch needs a microphone. You just can't keep it.
So,
that's a question for Angie. So.
no, it's actually, yeah.
No, he was just requesting
I want to
that.
get clarity
Sure.
on something you said earlier, which is you said that a list agent, if it's in your private referral network, and I'm going to presume, because it hasn't been said, but I'm going to presume that everybody that's in your MRAD, I think is what you guys call it, has access as well to the private network.
Correct.
And so you said that either it can be shown or it can't be shown, but then you said, but if you're the list agent, it doesn't stop you from showing it. And then right after that, you said, but you can put a sign in the yard. So in other words, what you're doing is encouraging me and me's. Because if I can't show it, and only the list agent can show it when there's a sign in the yard, that's intentionally creating me and me's.
Well, that's an interesting perspective.
It's an accurate perspective.
Well,
Yes.
I'll call it interesting. I can call it accurate as well in some way, but I don't know if I'm going to agree with your conclusion because that's not the reason we did it. Okay, so we're not trying to encourage anything. And when you say that we're creating this me-to-me situation, our alternative is if you don't have the private listing network, okay, and people just keep these to themselves and are still able to advertise them, that's what they're doing. So instead we're saying, hey, look, as a part of the cooperative, you at least have to put a sign on that property. You at least have to put it in the private listing network, which means that if I've got purchasers, I can call you up and say, sir, I've got somebody who's interested and qualified, and I would like to show them the property. And then they can go into the system and say, hey, you know what? I'm going to change from those showings to showings, as an example, and allow showings at that point in time, and allow that to occur. When I say, we can play the system all that we want. What we're trying to do is get information into the system so everybody knows what's going on out there. And so it's an interesting point that you bring up.
I would speculate, and I've said this before, and I know certain members of our MIBOR staff agree, that the vast majority of these perceptions of me and me would frankly all go away, and the use and need for these side networks and the use and need for the exempt forms would become literally a percent, if any, if me and me's were not legal, in my opinion, as they should be.
Different issue. And
It is and it isn't. It is
Well-
connected.
No, but what I'm saying is that, like in Illinois, I can tell you that dual agency is part of the statute. You're allowed to be a dual agent.
I
You're allowed to
agree.
work with both. So,
In Indiana as well.
Right. So
Doesn't mean it's ethical.
doesn't mean I can do anything about it either, but I get what you're saying. I understand what you're saying. Yes, sir.
Well, Mitch and I are on polar opposites of this
Respectfully.
issue, very respectfully,
Dr.
but,
Wall.
Yep, we need the,
sorry.
I have to borrow that. That's kind of a microphone.
It's super cool.
But I will agree with him on this, that if the listing agent can show a property, but we openly say that other buyer agents can't, I don't see really any reason to do that other than me and me. And so, I think our policies now, and we've had ethics complaints against it. It says show one, show all. If I'm allowed to show it, then I have to allow the other brokers to show it here currently.
So if you are showing it to your own clients,
Yes.
right?
Then
Somebody
I have
calls
to
you up
let
off of
Mitch.
that sign, then you're saying that you can't show it.
But note, he said code of ethics
Mm-hmm.
complaints toward that. We're association owned, you're brokerage owned.
Right.
So there are some nuances there, I think, that play into
Yeah.
this as
So-
well.
But Nora, these are universal.
Well, we technically, and what Angie's referring to is that as a broker-owned MLS, we technically don't have to follow NAR rules. We do most of the time, 99% of the time we do. And certainly everybody that's a part of our MLS is a realtor. And so they do have to follow the code of
Yeah, they do.
ethics.
Right.
And so, but again, the issue is if state law is allowing somebody, when you say representing both sides, maybe they're giving a disclosure. I know this would be a very rare circumstance, giving a disclosure to somebody saying they're not representing them. Maybe they're turning it over to somebody else in the office who's showing the property. I don't know. And what we're not going to do is take any steps to make it appear that we're outlawing the opportunity for a listing agent to sell a property themselves. We're just not going to do it. And we're not going to interfere with a client's ability, a seller's ability to get their property sold. That's not what we're doing here, again.
So the other points I want to make, I brought this graph back up because from a percentage standpoint, these off BLC listings, exempt listings, are a very small percentage of our inventory at any given time.
But I mean, we
So
only
keep
have-
that in perspective. It is
But it doesn't-
allowed.
We only have 6,000 listings in the BLC, and you're saying 1,000 listings are exempt.
We have more than 6,000, but yes.
And that was for a year.
Yeah, that was for the year.
That's for the year.
That was for the year, yeah.
But Angie, you're also discounting the marketing benefit and the leverage that this gives to an agent, which then turns into an on-market listing that they have used their off-markets
Yeah.
to get.
To generate interest, to generate that excitement, and then
Exactly. So it is.
when they go live, then they've got a flood of interest.
I would argue it's not done in the spirit of cooperation.
Sure. One second. Someone had asked me, I believe it was you in the back. Someone had asked me earlier before we got started, how is it even allowed for listings to be exempted? Why is that rule allowed? And this is from the MRED white paper that I'll point you guys to later too. But this says it rather succinctly, is the public does have a right to their privacy, a right not to host showings, a right to make their listing the best it can be before it's seen by the world. So, from a legal standpoint, that's always kind of where we pointed, is if the seller says, I want you to list my property, but I don't want I don't want it published for whatever reason, the standpoint has always been, we've got to be able to honor that in some way, but at least make them aware, provide some transparency as to why it may not be in their best interest. Contractually, the agreement is between the agent and their seller. There are some downsides to that, though, is the practice of withholding listings in an attempt to gain that market advantage by double ending that transaction may not be acting in the best interest, that providing that fiduciary to your client. Perhaps, not in every case, and I'm certainly not an attorney. So what are some of the effects, some of the side effects? Jeff, do you want to go into this? Because this came from your publication.
All right. The side effects of not putting
Yeah.
these, yeah, you know, I think that, well, obviously, we've already talked a lot about how it affects other agents who don't have the ability to see these listings in a system somewhere and figure that out. But then, what we've also been able to address, because we're getting this information into the system, is obviously it's improving the quality of comps, the quality of data, historical data that's available to people. So, you know, that clearly, you know, is a great benefit to our customers. The professionalism we've covered as well, you know, in terms of, again, you guys are driving around and there's a sign out, I'm not gonna repeat it, you know,
Yeah.
obviously that looks terrible when you're not able to identify what a property for sale is, when somebody can go and pick it off from some other place like, you know, a third-party site, or they see the sign.
And currently, in our exemption process, if you do see a sign or a Facebook ad or something like that, then you call us and we can look it up and see, is that exempt listing? If yes, then we say, here's the contact information or here's the agent, contact them directly to find out the details. But we can say that it has been filed, you know, legitimately per our rules as an exempt listing, go directly to the agent. If it has not been filed, then we reach out to that agent and say, hey, somebody else said that there's a sign in the yard. We don't point fingers, we don't disclose who made the report, but we say, you know, we've seen some advertising or been alerted to some advertising. Do you have a listing contract? We really hope so. For your own benefit, we really hope there's a. But again, to this point, we have kind of stayed out of the business of monitoring your signs. If you have written permission from the seller that you can put a sign in the yard, typically that would point that you have a listing contract, but perhaps not. Perhaps you know that listing contract is coming, is going to happen, but it has not yet happened. The seller says, I'm confident, go ahead and put a sign in the yard. You can. My concern has always been, are you as a realtor, as a paid professional, opening yourself up to risk by having advertising out in the marketplace without a contract, an effective contract yet? I would be uncomfortable, again, not an attorney, personally, as a former agent, I would be uncomfortable with that level of risk of advertising a property for which I had no guarantee to move forward and contract on. So, but the impact on that professionalism is certainly a concern, and we do get those calls of, there's a sign in the yard, how come I can't find it? Well, they've marked it as exempt, and it makes it a bit more difficult. I spent 2 hours combing the internet trying to find this listing, and I can't find it, but my clients know all about it.
Is there a reason we don't just require a sign in the yard to have an E, you know, a standard size E, that, you know, we would at least know when we're driving by that it's an exempt listing?
Just a rider.
Like a rider or something, a little sticker?
Again, to this point, we have not regulated your signs outside of license requirements.
For one thing, I would think that if anybody wants to have the sign in the yard and wants to meet me, they'd have their phone number and name on that sign, so somebody could actually call the sign right there instead of having to spend 2 hours figuring it out. But anyway, if you want an exempt listing for a seller, that doesn't necessarily mean you're not going to let anybody see it. So I have a question. I have one getting ready to go on the market actually today, and they just don't want it in the BLC for specific reasons. But I'm not allowing agents to see it. So I think there's two sides to this. That's not always 100% the case. So
Sure.
if we're going to have an exemption on it to not be in the BLC, we're not always saying
Right.
nobody can show it. You can show it. So my question is the only way that we can let anybody know that they can show it is by them seeing the sign in the yard. And you're saying we can't market it to other agents if they don't want it in the BLC. So that's my concern is, we're kind of not allowed to work with our agents by that way, because it's not in the BLC. That's what my client has asked me to do, but I still want people to know it exists somehow.
And we're not saying you can't market to your exempt listings. It's not going to be in the BLC. As long as you treat everyone the same, then that's between you and your seller.
So in the BLC,
What
I can
we-
put, can
What
we
we
show?
What we can't do is say, Kathy, you go ahead and bring your clients in and look at it. Jim, you can't. As long as the answer is yes to both or no to both, then that's between you and your sellers.
So on the BLC, the paperwork that states can be shown or can't be shown, I write in that it can be shown.
Yes.
And I go through CSS or however I do that, and I go through the whole process. I'm just not letting it go feed.
Right.
Okay.
It's not in the BLC.
Some
Oh,
some of this may change.
Yeah, some of this may change. So we're talking about this for a very good purpose.
Okay, well, we all decided to become realtors. We had to go through the testing and get licensed by the state. And there are certain laws and guidelines that we all have to be part of and be responsible to. It sounds like there's a lot of circumventing that can be done with this private versus what we all signed up for and the guidelines of the people that enforce the laws that we're supposed to go by. So my question to you is, how is this different or legal compared to what we have to do with listing requirements and timeline? The gentleman talking about, we can control who can see the property when through the BLC as it is now with our showings. We can set that up any way we want to. Everything that I'm hearing that they're offering, there's some form of that we can do through the BLC. So my question to you, sir, is this. If this is a private entity that people can join or be allowed and not be using the BLC, what's to keep 3 major brands from forming their own and keeping all their listings to their own agents? Whether it's Tucker and Remax and Carpenter, or Century 21 and Tucker and somebody else, what's to keep that from happening to keep out the independent people from being involved?
I'll talk about MRED's process in terms of how we created the private listing network and the focus groups that we held, which included our largest brokerages as well as other brokerages throughout all of our associations. We collected as much information as we could at the time, but we've continued to consult with them as well going forward. Now, I can speak to one company specifically, Compass, which is a large brokerage that's come into the Chicago marketplace that has literally issued publicly a statement saying, we love what MRED's created. All of our listings go into the MRED Private Listing Network, and yet they do have their own coming soon on their website, as does App Properties in Chicago have their own coming soon. They have an app that all of their agents use. And so while I'm not going to address publicly and for videotaping, our efforts to try to combat anything like that, because we're not trying to combat it. We're just supporting what our brokerages do. And you're saying what stops them? What we've provided is an opportunity for them to put it into a private listing network, to pre-market it, to not syndicate it all over the place, but to let all the other agents see it. If they still want to, which they've always had the opportunity to do, they could always exempt a listing. Exempt listings have existed since the beginning of time. So if they want to exempt it, all that we've said to them is that, okay, but in the true spirit of exempting it, as long as you're not advertising it, you're okay. If you start to advertise it, then you've got to get it into that private listing network or the standard listing network. And we're hoping that, and it appears to have addressed most of the issue. And by the way, what NAR and AR just did is very much based upon, MRED brought this to them originally. When I say brought it to them, the conversation came up, we presented what we do, and it's not exactly the same, but it's very close to what we're already doing, which you'll talk about in a little bit.
Yeah.
I think that we maybe need to go there now, because I think that that's an important piece of why we're all in this room, because there are people in this room that do not know what NAR did last week.
Okay.
Yeah, so I just want to say, first off, I know what NAR did last week and I'm in favor of it. I was in favor of what I believe that the weakness in our current system is, to a degree, the component that you guys have. I think the problem is that we want to be informed as agents, all right? And if you are not making other agents aware of what your listings are, then we do look bad. And in fact, we are shooting ourselves in the foot, because Zillow, Trulia, all the other sites out there have information that we don't have, all right, which is furthering their cause, not ours. Where you lost me was at the point where you said that someone could show it themselves, and not allow anyone else to see it, frankly. That's where you lost me. I was on board with you up to that point, all right? To your comment, with an exempt form as it stands right now, which is part of why it is abused, in my opinion, you can market to anywhere and everywhere in any way that you want, with the exclusion of the BLC, which means it can be in Zillow, it can be in Trillia, it can be everywhere. It's not going to be in Realtor.com, but it can be everywhere else. And the bottom line is that you don't have any credibility that your logic for having this be exempt is for privacy or for some other, they need time to get the property ready, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If now it's showing up on Zillow and all these other syndicated sites. So that's why I personally.
Yeah, and that has been the pain point, and I think the argument that has thrust this conversation up to NAR's level. So, so skipping forward some of the other examples we had, because I think you guys have a good handle on that anyway. On Monday, at the NAR National Convention, the NAR MLS Issues and Policy Committee voted on a proposal that enables MLSs across the country to effectively address the issue. So here is, I'm just going to read the policy statement. So the policy statement reads that within 24 hours of marketing a property to the public, the listing broker must submit the listing to the MLS for cooperation with other MLS participants. Public marketing includes, but is not limited to, flyers displayed in windows, yard signs, digital marketing on public-facing websites, brokerage website displays, including IDX and VOW, virtual office websites, digital communication, marketing, multi-brokerage listing sharing networks, and apps available to the general public. So this is being published out there in all of your news feeds, I guarantee it.
This one part was modified?
Yeah, this part,
to one business day.
One business day. So instead of 24 hours, it's one business day. MIBOR recently revised all of our rules to align with business days as well. We went from 48 hours to 2 business days on our rules. So our existing listing requirements will not change. If you have a listing contract, wake up. If you have a listing contract, then you must put it in the system or file it in another manner within those 2 business days. Now there's an additional trigger that's determined by marketing. So this is where it gets a little
Well, and again,
tricky.
there's nothing about this that requires MIBOR or anybody else to do what MRED did in terms of creating a private listing network or anything like that. It's not a requirement. All that's required is that with that, if you advertise it, then you've got to put it in the MIBOR system, right? And so that probably more addresses your concern at this point in time. I can see why you agree with that, because that's consistent with what you're saying. And so.
And frankly, to be clear, our intent at MIBOR is not to create a private listing network, but that is a model in a number of different models that is part of the conversation of, how do we handle this conundrum of the public can see it, the professionals cannot. How is that in the best interest of our clients if they're leveraging my expertise as a realtor, but frankly they have access to more information than I do through my professional association. So that's been the difficulty, and that's been the heartache, and why this is important, and why this was part of that bigger national conversation, because it's not just us.
And to be clear, right, it's not like you can, once you advertise it, just file an exemption.
Right.
The actual MLS system it's got to go into. Is
And-
everybody good on that? Understand that? So in other words, must submit the listing to the MLS for cooperation with other MLS participants.
And this is where I like what MRAD has done, all right? Because I get the fact, to me, it's all about consistency, all right? So you can't, it's not just the agents, it's the IDX feeds, it's the people who go to the MIBOR site, it's people who go to Realtor.com. We are diminishing our brand as a whole across the board and furthering the reason or the perception that we are barely above a used car salesman in the games that we play. So the reality from my perspective, to your comment of why I like this, you know, right now, if given the choice to where it has to go out or nothing, I would rather it go out. But I like your approach, aside from allowing an agent to show what others can't, because if they don't want to put it in BLC, then that's fine. I'm okay with that, as long as other agents have visibility, which means it still wouldn't show up on Realtor, it still wouldn't show up on IDX feeds, as long as it's also not being syndicated and put out to other outwardly public-facing search tools and apps, so that we have consistency across the board.
Yeah, I agree with that, absolutely.
And I have a mantra, personal mantra, and some of you may have heard me say it before, but you know, in considering any rule or policy or change to what we handle at the MLS side and the BLC side is, you know, before we do anything, is it practical? Is it measurable? Is it enforceable? If it's, you know, 2 out of 3 ain't bad, we still have a gap. So how can we get these things in place to where it helps make our marketplace work, but it's not requiring us to hire a MIBOR staff member to go and find all of your signs. You know, there's a practical aspect to it that has to kick in as well.
I'm
Yeah.
sorry, let me just jump in before you say something, because there is a really important point that we've kind of had to skirt by because we jumped ahead a little bit here. I just want to make sure everybody understands too. One of the big issues that was discussed at NAR, that was a big concern of ours too, with these private networks, is the issue of fair housing and the issue of what are you doing when you're exempting a listing and who are you keeping it from? Who are you showing it to? And so I just want to make sure that everybody understands too that there really is a component here. Once again, I know everybody wants to be cynical and think, oh, this is somehow just benefiting NAR or benefiting the MLSs or benefiting the associations. These really were important things to put into place to help you and make sure that you guys aren't getting yourselves into a place that you don't want to be. So I'm sorry, I didn't want to forget that. I apologize.
Angie, can you clarify, so our current exempt form states that the broker is able to market the property, it's just there's an agreement with the client that they will not be putting it in the MLS. That's how we are today.
That's how we are
With
today.
this change, then, will there be a change in that exempt listing form stating that you cannot market the property at all? Is that going to be changing?
There will be changes.
Okay.
This is, like I said, brand new. This ruling came through on Monday, so I'm just going to bring up the current form in case anyone's unfamiliar with it.
Implementation of this is required by May 1st.
Yeah, so the rule actually goes in place. It becomes effective January 1st, but they're giving us time to implement this by May 1st. We will not wait till May 1st. I mean, we've got frameworks. We've got lots of ideas. We have to land on the right idea, and we have to get a lot of input from our members, from our users, before going forward with, well, Angie said this would be the best way to go. Believe me, I am not the decision maker on this, although I will be part of the conversation. So, and I like having that opportunity because I get to talk to you guys all day, every day. So I have a little bit different perspective than I think many do, because I'm in your office as I'm talking to you all the time. You know, we chat back and forth. This is strongly debate sometimes, and it helps fill in. You know, maybe there is a perspective that we have not thought of yet. Maybe there is a point of view that no one has spoken yet. So talk to us about this. Raise your concerns and make sure that is part of the conversation going forward. Currently, this is the exemption form as it stands. Anybody use this? I was not going to call you out, but you all raised your hand so quickly. So yeah, this says it must be filed either by putting in the system or with this exemption form, or there is a hefty fine attached if you do not. So that is, that is It's a very simple form. If for any reason the listing will not be submitted to the MIBOR Broker Listing Cooperative Listing Service for dissemination to all participants, this form must be signed by the listing agent, listing managing broker, and seller and submitted to MIBOR within 2 full business days of the effective listing contract date. Outside of that, it just underlines that the sellers understand the effects of not submitting it. Your listing won't be available to the thousands of realtors who participate. You're drastically reducing market exposure and may result in not receiving the best possible offer. But we don't say, and realtor, you may not do this type of marketing. It's not that specific currently. You still have to follow your code of ethics. You still have to follow along with all of the other responsibilities that you have. But as far as the listing service today is concerned, you put the listing in or you file the exemption and you go on your merry way. As long as you're being fair and equitable according to the code of ethics, providing the fiduciary as you and your seller have determined that you see fit, then we really don't get involved outside of, do you have a contract, is it legit, and then when you're ready to put it on, you all sign and say, now we're ready, and it proceeds as normal. So there's not those limiting factors today. What this MLS policy puts in place is that added layer of, if you start marketing to the public, then what? Then you've got to make it available. Did you have a question? There's you have the cube.
Yeah, I've got the cube. So I really struggle with everybody, always throwing out that the me and me's is the only reason to do, coming soon. We have talked at length about coming soons, and to not go long, I'll give one example. And I would support any system that was put into place that would still allow this kind of a thing. I've got a client that lives in a neighborhood they're building phase 2 right next to them. People are driving through that neighborhood all the time, checking it out, thinking about building, thinking about buying one of those lots and building a new home. And we're a couple weeks away from being ready. They want to get ready. We go to professional photos. I do pre-listing inspections on all of my listings. That's something that I offer them. Those things take time, and if I can put a sign in the yard and I can do a 10-day or a 14-day period there where no showings are allowed by me or anyone, it's in our contract that there will be no showings for marketing and preparation only. Somebody driving through that neighborhood thinking about building, but really is in a bit of a hurry, sees that house is up 2 weeks before, then as soon as it goes live, they're able to see it. And I can tell you, I can't tell you how many times that I've had agents call me and say, hey, my buyer said they saw this sign, they sent me a picture of the sign, when are you going to be live? I tell them, Kathy Hall has called me on one out in the country that somebody saw it. And I give them the information and then we move on. And then when it's live, they've got their client in there the first thing. So there are some good cases for it. I understand that it's abused, and we have to try and find something to fight that. But the last thing I'll say is I'm really tired of hearing this. People say that realtors are a step above, or considered a step above used car salesmen. It is not. It is. They do studies every year, and we're consistently at the bottom. There is a very large study done, and it's presented here at MIBOR every year in the ethics classes. And those stats are updated every year. And we are middle to upper middle of the pack, not even close to used car salesmen. If realtors and people in our profession would quit saying it, people would quit believing it.
And I do want to jump in and say too that, because you reminded me of something, one of the more fascinating things we found out when we did the white paper is in the private listing network, we have no time limit. Leave it in time in the private listing network as long as you'd like, obviously subject to how long your listing agreement is. But around the country, people have landed for some reason on 21 days. We want to keep it to 21 days and then force you to do something else. So just another thing just to throw it out there. But again, I do want to emphasize, nothing requires you guys to do this. It was just something that, again, Angie asked me to talk about so you guys would have an idea of something that's out there. you know, as
And
an
there's-
example.
There's a few different models, and I won't read all the words. This is very wordy. It's very unlike me to put this many words on a screen. But there are a bunch of models out there, and the NRED white paper actually pulls all of these to kind of give you a sense of there are MLSs across the country trying to solve this same problem and going about it in different approaches. This one by Smart MLS is probably the closest aligned to kind of our framework, what we have in place now and where we could go forward. This may be, end up not being at all what we go forward with. But there are models in place that we can look at and say, okay, with what we have in place today, what would be the most practical, provide us a measure, provide us to be able to enforce this in a meaningful and non-disruptive way to handle these. So this one, they do have do they have a 21 day? I can't remember. But they have a solution for delayed listings. They have a solution for coming soons. That allow for a period of time to accomplish what it is that you and your seller are trying to accomplish to provide them the best experience that they can have. This is FMLS out of Georgia. They actually have a coming soon status that they launched earlier this year, and that they have that 21-day piece built in. This is another Matrix user, by the way, too. But they added a whole new status. We're not sure that that's the right way to go. The statuses, that level of additional programming that may not serve you best. So we're looking at all of these other models out in the marketplace and saying, okay, based on what we have now and the processes and the framework we have in place, what'll be best going forward? What's going to make the most sense?
And let me mention too that when we first did the private listing network, we had it as a separate part of the database, which it is at this moment, a separate part of the database. You actually have to go to it to do your searches, to do, to pull out information from it. Because frankly, our board wanted to be progressive, wanted to be upfront on this, and wanted to go for it. They weren't sure it was going to stick. It has. It's been very well received. We've had very few complaints about it, but we always iterate. We always progress and change. And so one of the things that we're changing is that we're going to change our private listing network properties to a status. And what that will allow our agents to go in and do is to search it along with everything else, but they will still have all the other limitations will still be in place. So I just wanted to mention that. I'm sorry.
That's okay, Angie, this is more of an administrative question for you, which I think you may have already answered, but if we were switching a listing from private to MLS, would we still be adding up days on the market as far as when it hits the actual MLS?
Yeah. So currently, our days on market is written to begin
By the contract,
on
right?
the contract date. The execution of that contract, the beginning of that contract, is what we would consider on market.
So will there ever be an expectation as far as if we were to list a private listing that we would ever, in any case, have to move it to the MLS? Like, I'm just curious, like, can I list it in the private, sell it there, and never list it on the MLS? Like, how
They
does
do
that-
allow that. If it sells on the private network, it cannot. Is that accurate, Jeff? If it sells while on the private listing network, it cannot be put into the standard listing network as a sold. Is that correct?
No, it actually, in ours, it closes, and when it closes, it has to.
Oh,
be.
it has to be. I had that.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering, for more of like reporting purposes, how that works.
Yeah,
Okay.
has to go over to the standard network. And
There,
that's
yeah,
what-
there's
Okay.
another one of these business models that prohibits it. If it closes on their hidden network, then it cannot go
I mean,
in.
it's just how people do business differently, right? But I
Yeah.
mean, from our perspective, we wanted to get that information in for the counts.
Well, and I found this interesting. We have a relationship with the Austin Board of Realtors and MLS. They are a similar structure to what we have. They're similar size, similar book of listings on any given time. They actually, this was part of the ones I skipped, they actually implemented a coming soon status in July of 2016. Showings were not permitted per the status definition, but the usage of the status stirred so much controversy in their marketplace that they discontinued that status in August of 2018. And they said, it's, it snowballed and it caused so much additional issues that we're going back. So there are lots of these experiments of like, is this gonna work?
Ken Austin made a show of it in
Yeah.
NAR, of objecting, of saying that NAR should not do this. And I'm just tell you guys that because of the 6-week time frame, they gave plenty of time through CMLS and through other ways of vetting this thing. That ended up really being the only substantive complainer, and they were overwhelmed. I mean, the thing passed, what, 720 to 90 or something like that, like that in front of the NAR board. And there were rumors going in that NAR was going to try to delay this or something like that. And the wave just, when I say overcame it, and that people felt that it was important enough to have this. And just one other quick thing, didn't matter to us.
Yeah.
We've had this for 3 years and we were keeping it. So when I say it didn't matter to us, it was nice that we were able to put the information out. It's nice that people saw the value of the information. I don't mean it that way. I mean that we were going to keep it no matter what.
It did not affect your current
No.
business track. Although it sounds like you are considering some.
We always do. I mean, we always, like I say, we iterate. So as we get feedback, we'll change it. We've changed it, probably tweaked it up a couple of times since its implementation.
Did you have a question?
Yes, if you already addressed this, I apologize. If we do, I'm asking.
You're
for-
forgiven.
I'm asking for a friend.
Aren't we all?
Do we currently have a time limit that it can be exempt?
The terms of the listing contract.
So
it-
we can be exempt to the.
It could be to the end of the expiration of your listing contract. If I'm so famous that I don't want you ever putting my house on the BLC, we can exempt it for that entire time frame. Or my celebrity takes a dive and I'm ready to allow you to list it, then we could change our mind at any point in time and go ahead and submit that listing into the BLC. So no, there is no time limit to that exemption form. It's
So-
whatever you and your seller decide. His arm is about to fall off, so as soon as you wrap up, he's gonna
I think that one other use of the exempt form is, maybe this is the wrong thing to think, but if your client talks about listing in fall, but they don't want to put it on the market until spring, you have them sign that contract, because then they're your client, and they can still get out of the contract, but it inspires a little more loyalty from them.
Yes. I have certainly heard from agents in the marketplace that they will do a listing for a period of time that they never intend putting in the system, and so they will exempt that listing. And at some point in time, maybe at the same appointment, we'll sign an additional listing agreement. I won't name names, stop smiling. Additional listing agreement to begin, when that other one ends. This is a pocket listing. It's never going anywhere, right? That's a term we hear a lot. It's an exempt listing officially on our documentation, but that's what a lot of times in the marketplace you hear referred to as a pocket listing. I have it, tucking it away, no harm, no foul. It can be for that entire listing period. I know they are ready to go, April 20th is the date that they've said. They're ready to go in the spring on April 20th because something happens then. I pre-signed. The risk you're mitigating by doing that is instead of signing a listing agreement that says we're going to sign it today, whatever today is, November 15th, to begin on April 20th. Well, what happens between now and April 20th, if they change their mind, do something else, find somebody they like better? Again, not an attorney, I'm not saying that wouldn't be a legally binding agreement, but I would be uncomfortable with assuming that risk. So that was a long answer to the question you were asking.
They're still signing the exempt form, though. I'm not talking about putting it on a contract.
Yeah, people kind of do it in a variety of different ways. I think you're better protected with the exemption, but that's my own opinion and no letters behind my name.
But don't days of
They would. So if you change your mind halfway through and put it on, then it begins at that original estate.
I have a question. Whatever happened, or what was the rationale between we're not allowed to do confidential? I remember when we could list
You can.
an expensive property and the address wouldn't be on there, and even the price was confidential. So I felt like that was pretty good. If somebody really
Right,
had
that
an
celebrity
interest,
factor.
cooperation was there, maybe the county, you know,
Uh-huh.
where it was, but not.
You can
we-
still do that. That's still part of our rules.
Oh,
Yeah, you can still do that.
okay.
You're welcome. Run, Nicole, run!
I wanted to just clarify the two listing contracts things. I don't sign listing contracts in the fall for the spring. It's for the coming soon period. Because as she said, if you
I
do-
wasn't accusing you
Oh, no,
of
no, no, no,
anything.
no,
I
but
was looking
since
this
I
direction.
smiled, everybody looked at me and thought that's what I did. So when I do a coming soon, it is specifically for that. And I know that if I'm gonna exempt that listing for 2 weeks while I do coming soon, then those days on market, if I use that one listing contract, those days on market are just gonna, when I put it on, it's gonna be on 14 days. So I do a 14-day listing contract, I exempt it, it expires at midnight. The next morning, that my live one goes live, days on market, I was gonna say 0, becomes 1. And I don't have those days on market. It is truly for marketing purposes. And I do coming soon on every listing, and I've only done one me and me on any listing I've ever done. And I'm sorry, we had 7 offers, and the one that asked me to show it to them, it was a full price cash offer. It was the best one. My clients chose it, so.
That's okay. Please give it to her.
I just have a real quick question, and that is, do you charge extra, or did the cost of my board or your board dues go up because of your private listing?
No.
Never.
No,
Okay.
nothing to do with that. It was a fairly easy technology, to implement, frankly, so.
And that's really, I mean, that's why
Good
we
question.
put ours in as incompletes. It didn't require any additional money, time, I mean, other than staff time, to get that in place. So that is certainly a factor of, that we have to take into account. If we were to add an additional status, is there a programming cost with our vendor for that? So in that case, does that make it less of a valid option than maybe some others that we can put into place? Oh, who's got the box, Nicole? Right here.
You guys have Matrix, right? So.
We do have Matrix.
Yeah, so hopefully that'll be a number of MLSs.
I mean, they're
around.
getting in line.
Yeah.
We're all lining up.
Is the only way you can advertise an exempt property through the private listing network?
Right, once it.
Two
it gets-
different, yeah.
right, Once it gets advertised, it's no longer going to be an exempt listing from MRED's perspective. Then you're putting it in the private listing network or putting it in the standard listing network, and it's no longer exempt.
Oh,
So their exemption process is handled very differently from ours.
Yeah.
They've been watching marketing a lot longer than we have. We've tried to stay out of your marketing for as long as humanly possible. So Angel's gotta,
But just for
wait, you have to have the dodgeball mic. You can throw it at me later, it's fine.
But yeah, so if your methodology runs in line with what we're talking about here, the change from NAR, that specifically references public marketing. If you're saying that your program is broker marketing, it is not marketed to the public, then are you still able to put that listing into MRED and it not be considered marketing to the public and therefore still be exempt?
Okay, all right, let me sort that out. Putting it within the private listing network or the standard listing network allows you to do all the advertising that you want. So at that point in time, advertising isn't an issue for us anymore. It's when you kept it entirely out of the MLS and all of a sudden decide to do some kind of advertising that's public facing. Okay, and I emphasize that because it is possible for you to have a closed network of people that you communicate with that already have a relationship with you that we probably wouldn't consider to be public advertising. Okay, we're just seeing the test cases as they come through now. Well, what I'm saying to you is that if in the standard, easy way, let's just make this easy, any kind of way of putting it out to the public, whether it be a sign on the property, whether it be putting it on the third-party aggregator sites, that kind of stuff, putting it in the newspaper, does anybody do that anymore? Whatever, that would be considered advertising, and then it moves into, got to put it in the private listing network or the standard listing network, and then you can do whatever you want.
Are you saying or?
Either one.
So what you're saying is, once you take the step to put it in MRED, the broker private, portal.
Private listing network.
Okay, then at that point, it's no longer exempt, and you can also, it can't be just made available to other brokers and be exempt. If you're marketing it to other brokers, it's the same as marketing it to the public.
Yeah, but keep in mind that, again, in the private listing network, you have the option to say no showings, in which case you're telling all the other brokers they can't show this property right now, right? Again, the caveat, they can call you, and then all of a sudden you can decide to change it to showings if you'd like, but the point of the matter being is it's really intended to be pre-marketing, marketing B2B, I'm calling it business to business, meaning to just the other agents and not out to the world. And by the way, out of the private listing network, I think I said this before, we don't syndicate. So if you want to syndicate, right, you can do that. It's not going to be 90X.
What do you think the value is in marketing it just to brokers and not letting the potential buyers themselves know about the listing?
Well, I think that when we talked about pre-marketing it to other brokers who know their marketplace, you take a look at that, and if there's a lot of expression of interest about it at a certain price, as an example, that gives you information about that property.
You guys used to do this in person, in meetings all the time. Hey, I've got a house on Geist that looks like this and has this many bedrooms. If you have any buyers, I'm getting the contract tomorrow. You guys used to do this all the time, or I just got the contract, it's not in yet, or whatever. Yeah. So if you want to start putting the ink to paper and passing out the hot sheets again, then as you could. But it's a similar process. They just have a structure around it.
That's changing as we go on,
Yeah.
as we meet and hear about other
And pointing back
questions.
to this, it's the listing broker must submit the listing to the MLS for cooperation with other MLS participants, and then you have the professionals in the room able to see the same information that you're putting out there to the public. I got an awesome T-shirt at the last conference I went to. I should have worn it today. I just wasn't thinking. It says, "If I could sell it, I should see it." So this is from one of the, I think it's CRMLS put those together. I don't know, somebody threw a T-shirt at me and I was like, yay, clothes. But they're doing a whole campaign around this of like, the public shouldn't have access to better data than our professionals in our cooperative. That's the whole essence of the cooperative, is I share with you, you share with me, and we can go from there. It's not always adversarial. Where's the box?
Box is back here. I have a question. So I know this is going to be something that we look at many different systems that are currently out there. But my understanding, and you will probably have to make some changes to your existing system as well, is if you advertise it, even if it was in a private network, if you talk to somebody outside of your office, that was advertising. So is that not going to change your policy?
It's not going to change our policy because, again, since we're not an NAR MLS, we don't have to change our policy. It'll be something that we may consider, or we may consider syncing up with this if we find that there are a couple of tweaks that we need to sync up with. Because in the language that we provided them, yeah, NAR did change it a little bit, and did move it around a little bit. And what we like to think is that we're going to interpret these things as they go along. And if we have to tweak up the rule in order to make it more consistent with what our customers want, that's what we'll do.
And
I'm
there
sorry,
is
that's a
lot of-
non-answer because I don't know.
There's a
I
lot
don't
of
think we're gonna have to change.
interpretation going on. Mitch has it, and then Megan, and then James. And we're out of time, but so if you have to go, we'll continue the conversation. But There's a lot of interpretation going on among MLSs as well. I saw on a Facebook group I'm in the other day, someone said, so, I'd have to look it up for the exact quote, but so is NAR saying that no one can do coming soons anymore? We're like, no. And so there is some of that terminology that's gonna have to get kind of ironed out of what do you consider coming soon? We have one opinion of coming soon over here. I know Nicole has said I would consider coming soon a contract that has not yet happened. Like the contract itself has not yet occurred. So how is that coming soon? So there is going to be different opinions and different interpretations that we'll work through, which is why NAR gave us time to have those discussions in our marketplace and make sure that we give you the best possible solution that we can.
And some looseness in the language so that there's local interpretation of this, as you just suggested. So there are going to be differences, and that's intentional.
To respond to something that you asked first, I'm going to presume that you can search and set up searches off of your
Private listing network.
Yes.
So, I mean, think of the benefit to be able to go back to the days of telling a client about a listing before they see it for themselves first, all right?
When were those days?
Right. So my question, first off, I want to applaud you and MIBOR for having the conversation and starting the dialogue. I'm going to presume that part of the reason that you asked him to join us is that obviously an iteration of what they are doing is an option.
Well,
my question for you is, if it is an option, what might you do different than what they're doing in their current system?
They have a different platform that they run on. So in so much as we have our matrix platform, we want to make sure that we're fitting within that framework. Especially as this is new and getting going. Honestly, I don't see this decision as, from a platform and programming standpoint, as a huge game changer to the way that we handle things now. What will probably happen is what staff is doing currently on your behalf will get exposed to you so that you can take care of that side of the business on your own, with requirements for documentation to be provided as part of the supplements or something to that effect. But looking at that framework and saying, how can we make this beneficial? Do we keep it so that only the agent, their broker, and the staff can see those? They're no longer exempts, but whatever that term becomes, or is it more beneficial to allow those types of listings to be displayed to only other brokers, or to on a certain time frame?
How are they being marketed? Then you don't have
How are they
choice.
being? Yeah. Once it's marketed, then that changes how we handle our rules. That's the piece that's really going to change our rules, is triggering off of that marketing date.
The DARE process kind of allows you to have your cake and eat it too.
It does.
Try it. But I will tell you this, to cut to the chase on your question, I was asked to come here because of our familiarity with this and because of our years with this and the fact that I've worked with these guys and Shelley and they know me. There's nothing about this that's like, hey, Jeff, come on in here and lay the groundwork for some kind of... No, I'm just saying, this is not necessarily going to be anywhere near what you guys are going to do, and we'll still be friends if it's not. But I'm just saying, that I just want to be clear about that. Be open-minded, because that's the process that you guys are going to engage, is figuring this thing out.
One of the reasons that we reached out to Jeff is because they've been doing this for so long, and it is an interesting... different model to what many of the other MLSs that we're very familiar and similar to have implemented. So we're going to be looking at all of that. And because it came top of mind, because up on here on the screen, MRED published this white paper, and I have a beautiful physical copy of it that was provided at the CMLS conference that we were recently at. So it was top of mind because they've done a lot of the research on the different models available, what works, what didn't work, what are the differences, all those nuances. And I'm happy to send a link to this report to everyone that attended today so you have it as a reference.
Yep.
There's a lot of news coming out about this right now. Here's just a few that hit my inbox on Monday. Just Monday. NAR has it on their page. I got an Inman newsletter. I've got, RISO posted, hey, here is our standard terminology to help you guys weed through this. CMLS published. Of course, the MRED link was included in everything that came out. And there's probably a number of others. NAR sent out an internal message. I think that's actually what that is. But everyone is publishing information about this right now because every MLS across the country has to figure this out quickly and effectively.
So what you're saying is that MRED isn't necessarily the system we're going to be going with. This is just
not the system.
It's just an option.
Yeah.
So for now,
Maybe.
at least until January, but for now, we're going to continue to use the exemption form.
Yes.
And then in January, when we do have some sort of plan of what we're doing, will that exemption form disappear or will that still be an option? Maybe. It's just kind of maybe.
That's going to be a shrug the shoulders emoji.
Okay. I mean, I'm going to speak to that because clearly the current exemption form.
Nicole Jensen,
VP
VP of Business Solutions.
Currently, the exemption form that we're all used to will not, and it's not January 1st.
Okay.
It's when we decide, and we will make you fully aware of the timing, like you are going to not, like Angie will be out.
This will be what your screen looks like from me.
Right.
Here's a letter.
And so that is going to change because the current exemption form would violate this rule. And so this is a mandatory adoption from NAR because we're a realtor of MLS, BLC. You got me saying MLS again. It took me 2 years to start saying BLC. You come in one day and I say the letters.
The wrong letters.
And so it is going to change and it will sunset. As we currently know it, the process that Angie was going over is not going to be an option. What the process looks like on the other side of whatever date that might be, let's say April timeframe.
Prior to May 1st.
Prior to May 1, but likely not, January, February, because it's going to take us time to figure out what we're doing. That will be a new process. What that looks like is what we're talking about here. And Kathy Halls is the chair of the BLC Policy Committee right now. They thoughtfully considered it on Wednesday. We are sharing links. We're going to share this video. There's webinars being put out. The CMLS is doing discovery. And so I think it's just important to know that why we had you here today and why we're talking about this is because we want you to know that we're aware and that we're trying to do everything we can and engage all stakeholders, including strategic visioning committees that are at MIBOR, committees like the past presidents, the board of directors. We're going to do surveys. We're going to try to listen and figure out what's best for MIBOR and for the Indianapolis area marketplace. So Jeff is just here to share one model that is not, we're not joining them, we're not starting a private listing network. That may not be, it may be, we don't know. We might add a status, we might not. We might add a delayed listing form, we might not. But what we're doing right now is discovery, and we wanted to start the conversation with you so that you all can go out and do your due diligence and educate yourselves on other marketplaces so that when we ask you for your feedback, you're ready to give it. And you're not looking at us going like, what are you talking about? That's all. That's what today was about.
I have to clarify one other thing.
Yeah.
I think I'm a little offended at this point. I was invited to this. I've got it in writing in an email because of how attractive I am. And
Yes.
because I'm funny.
That's
Now,
right.
I'm finding out that it's all about this other.
So I will say, when Nicole and I were discussing this topic, and I went to her and I'm like, who's my expert? Who do I tap? And she goes, Jeff Lasky. And I went, of course! And I went and ran down to my phone and called him. So I'm so grateful to Jeff for coming today.
One more real quick.
One real quick.
Our question that we were sort of quietly discussing at our table is, it's an assumption, but it would if you were choosing to implement a product such as this, it would be board-wide, right? It's not like a brokerage would opt in, that you would have to pay to access that information, but it would be to all of the cooperating members.
Yeah, that's the whole point.
Yes.
That's the idea.
So, again, Jeff, thank you so much
Yeah,
for coming
my
today.
pleasure.
Really appreciate it. Thank you guys for being here.